I mean, you're a third generation guy.
Right. I don't know. Not necessarily in college. Early on in college, I wasn't sure what I'd do, but by the time, I guess it was senior year or junior year, decided to, do the LSATs and give it a try and do it. So, it wasn't like all my life this way, but, and later in college.
Probably for the camera, there's a little genealogy here of lawyers. Goes back to your grandfather.
Yeah.
Maybe explain a little bit about who they were.
Yeah, so Wilson, it was sort of interesting. There was something in the newspaper that said if you could get to Stanford, you could get, it was like a free tuition deal. And he was a pretty good student in high school, but he and a friend decided to take him up, but the issue was how to get there. And there was a guy that had I don't know, somehow he had some free tickets on the train, basically. And so he went to Stanford, and he was in the first graduating class there. And one of his classmates was President, Tom, you would remember better. Was it Coolidge or? Anyway. So then he came back and went to Harvard and came back to Jamestown and this is right around the turn of the century because he was born in 1874, I think. So anyway, and he came back and practiced forever in Jamestown, lived on 317 Crosman, and really.
Did he start out by himself?
He was with another guy. He went in with a sort of a litigator type guy here, and I think his name was Frank Stevens. And anyway, and then Walter Miller. Right. Walter Miller. He came along later, but they had a long, great association for a lot of time. And then Charlie and my dad. After the war, finished up.
For the record, Sam.
Sam, right? Yep. Yeah, so he came back and joined the group, and so they had a nice, good run. And then Bill Evans, Tom Flowers joined later, early '70s, and then I came back in 82. I graduated in 81, so it would have been probably that fall. And it's interesting. Practice in Jamestown. It's a nice community. It's a lot of fun. You meet a lot of great people, and it was a good bar association. A lot of lawyers that are real nice to work with. So it was, after I don't know how many years I did it, 38 or whatever number of years. It felt like the right time to retire, so that's what I did.
So it was Price and Miller. So
you're right.
It's Wilson Price and Walter Miller.
Walter Miller.
Bring in Charlie Price, who's older.
Yeah. He's older than my dad, Sam. Yeah. A few years. Yeah.
And your dad was a World War II veteran.
That's right.
Who we had a chance to interview.
Yeah.
For those on listen to this tape, you can watch it.
Right.
YouTube. What was the principal practice? Was it a general practice, or did they?
Yeah, I mean, they did a lot of estate planning and estate work. Real estate. Small business, transactional stuff primarily. It wasn't too much in the way of litigation. When Bill Evans came, he did a little bit, and I did a very little bit. When I didn't do much litigation myself, so it was more transactional type practice, and a lot of estate stuff. In those days, quite a bit of that on estate planning and that kind of thing. So, and they represented, local companies and Chautauqua Institution for a long time, and so that kind of thing. Yeah.
Let's talk about Chautauqua Institution. You brought it up because you were the third generation representing as general counsel for Chautauqua. Yeah. How did that begin? I think I've heard this story from your dad, but
it was interesting. They were looking for this was in I think it was 14. It was in 1914, I think was when they, for whatever reason, they needed it was a transition, and they were looking for general counsel. And my grandfather interviewed him, and he got the job. Basically, he had a long, great association with Bester, President Bester. They were, you know. He would go up on, I think it was Saturday mornings, and they would just sit down together and talk about issues, Chautauqua stuff that needed to get done. And so they had a long stint there. And he would go up with Theo, my grandmother, and spend, you know, a week at the Cary or whatever in the summer. So they actually went up there a little bit too. Never bought anything or anything like that, but they, this is in the, you know, 30s and 40s and stuff. So, yeah, it was really great, and then Charlie represented them for a while, and then it got transitioned to my dad, and then when I came back, my dad was getting close to retirement, sort of, so he wanted to see if you know, I would maybe be interested, so I used to go up and, you know, early on attend some meetings and deal with their, they had an architectural review board kind of stuff, so I worked with that group, and but it worked very well. I met some, you know, that, as you know, at Chautauqua, you meet some amazing, fun people, and very interesting. So for me, it was great. I really enjoyed it, and you get such unusual issues that can pop up there because of sort of a little unusual setup, the way the legal setup up there. So that was sort of interesting too. And there was a big tax case that was before my time, and it was you know, dealing with to what extent. Part of it was real estate taxes was one issue around some of their facilities and how all that, and that went to the Court of Appeals. That was back in the, I think in the 60s, actually, early 60s. But that turned out well for them on that. That was a very important case for Chautauqua. And but anyway, you get a lot of very interesting issues that pop up, and it's been a lot of fun.
It's a tremendous run. I mean, you talk about the Price legacy there.
Yeah, over 100 years. Yeah, it was kind of neat. Yeah, they I don't know, one time they sort of acknowledged that, which was really nice. When my dad was still alive. This was in, I think, 2014 or 2015 or something. But yeah, it was kind of neat.
So what were the particular, well, maybe if you could, because I'm not sure I could, explain the corporate structure. It's obviously physically located in the town of Chautauqua. It's not its own municipality, but what is it?
Yeah, well, there have been issues that popped up around, you know, because they have all these strict architectural requirements, and the town's relationship with Chautauqua is interesting because they've sort of let Chautauqua deal with their internal, not zone it, so to speak, in the way traditional towns, cities are zoned. So, but the structure was created by an act of the New York State Legislature in 1902, and it was a combination of a couple of corporations that were there prior that operated Chautauqua. Chautauqua was older than that. But prudently, the legislation there is quite strong about the authority of the trustees to deal with the property and to deal with issues in Chautauqua. So it's a special act of the legislature that really is the core, so that's sort of the framework of it, and then the very good relationship with the town of Chautauqua around how we deal with these. Well, you know, I mean, everybody, you go up there, I mean, these tiny little lots, and trying to figure out architectural zones. You know, what can you do in these different zones to try to maintain the historic flavor and, you know, of the grounds. And there was a great trustee, David Faust, I think it was around '84, where he really redid the regulations and created these different zones that had different special importance. To what extent these historic area, and as you know, some of them are sort of almost like a suburb type as you head north on the ground. So what you can do, how much you can build. He was a lawyer, very, very, very good lawyer in Florida. He worked for a larger firm, and they did a lot of this land use stuff. So he was very good, and that was a real blessing for Chautauqua to have his hand on that, his knowledge.
That's Sylvia's husband.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep. And he was the board chairman he was a great board chairman. Fairly young, elected the board chair when that happened. But he really was very energetic and really helped, sort of put that into a good, solid framework up there. So
you and I do an awful lot of real estate, and part of the uniqueness of Chautauqua is, in fact, it's real estate. And originally, they owned the land and they would lease it.
Right, they'd have 99-year leases, and those are all converted. In the 30s, there were two really tough times for Chautauqua. They basically went bankrupt in the 30s, and to get out of receivership, people would. One of the techniques, they'd sell trees, they'd do all kinds of stuff to try to raise money. But one of the things they did at that time was convert those leases to deeds, regular deeds. And you'd pay something, not much, but you'd pay something to have that conversion done. And now they've all been converted. There's no leases left, but it was all leases back in the day, pre-30 period.
And with those deeds came restrictive covenants.
Right.
And that's really the catch.
That is. All the deeds contain a provision that, they're subject to these restrictive covenants, but most restrictive covenants are right in the deed. These are in the deed, but they also provide that the Board of Trustees can modify, as times change, update the regulations, and you're still subject to those updated regulations, a la the '85 big rewrite. So now, when you're going to change your house or do something, you're subject to those, and that's sort of the key element, is that those fundamental restrictions that appear in the deed, right?
Yeah, and that's enter the Architectural Review Board, enter the Capital Improvement.
Right. Fee, yeah, right.
Assessment,
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Which was a godsend for Chautauqua, I'm sure, just for the improvements. You think about that.
Yeah, because it's the town and all the roads need to be, the street lighting, all the maintenance of the common areas is there because it's private property, right? It's not a town responsibility.
Well, in a somewhat of a sense, if to shortcut it, it's sort of like a condominium association.
A little bit. There are some similarities to that. Like if you go to a place down in Florida, they have common elements. They're going to charge you a fee or whatever to maintain those, and so there's some elements of similarity there. No question. Yeah.
I know it's a conversation of note, but recently, but security-wise, you guys have I don't want to say a police force, you have a security force.
Right.
And what's the relationship, has it been with the county? I mean, at some point you got your own guards inside, but do they?
Yeah, it's been through a number of iterations on the security front. For a while, the sheriff would deputize the part of the security group, key elements of the security group, so they were actually, deputized in that way, but that hasn't been the framework currently. But they've entered into a relationship with the town where they can get this elevated peace officer status under the law. There's a provision in the not-for-profit law that talks about special police, but they don't have the same authority as peace officers do. So, and Chautauqua, no question, special police, they totally qualify for that. But the peace officer piece wasn't included. Right. So they weren't within that definition. They have some enhanced authority. So they're working through that. It's an important element for Chautauqua, and of course, very topical now with what's happened with over the summer and just generally. When you think about Chautauqua and how it has been very open for all the, yeah, and that's the way it's been. Hopefully it doesn't change too much that way, but it's an ongoing issue for Chautauqua to figure that out. How are they going to deal with security, and if they can get that peace officer situation figured out, that'll help them, given their security more authority to do things.
Are they governed, because they are act of the legislature, so they
right.
Are they by definition governed by the not-for-profit corporation law? What sort is their state governance?
Yeah, they are. They fall under the not-for-profit law, so they're subject to those provisions. But they also have that legislation also gives them certain just authority based on the legislation that is in addition to the not-for-profit law. But they're subject to that as far as the big rewrite that was 14 or whatever, the not-for-profit law about having audit committees and all the conflict issues and all that would apply to their board.
Is that hard to go through that? I remember it. I remember that 85 rewrite. And there was a lot of conversation, a lot of open public hearings and not so open. But was that tough for you to kind of navigate?
Yeah, I mean the big 85 rewrite of the thing. Yeah, because it was. I mean, I think one nice thing about it, it gave a little more clarity to property owners. Before you'd go in front of this board, and it was a little hard to know exactly what you could do. Right. And so you were sort of a little bit not at the whim, but I mean, they'd have certain criteria. But this one really helped because it really could give you some direction, and hopefully you wouldn't have to go in front of the ARB. You could fall within the existing guidelines. So. In a way, it was a major change, but it was, I think, generally pretty well accepted by the community.
Was that the rewrite also that identified and sort of the lakefront? I mean, that was always an issue. Who owned the lakefront?
Yeah. The lakefront's a very interesting element in Chautauqua because they've actually got, which is very unusual, they've got letters patent from the state of New York, which allows, where they actually own the part of the lake going out. I mean, the bed of the lake, So, and we actually, my dad, before he retired, he said we should have that surveyed. So we have this great survey of this property that Chautauqua owns, going not just to the lake front, but into the lake about, in some areas, as much as 300 feet out, I think. It's been a while since I've looked at that survey. So, but to circle back to your point, very importantly, no one owns property on the lake front. In other words, where you think you're up in the north area, so-called Gold Coast or whatever you want to call it, you'd think that they would own to the. It looks like they mow or whatever. It looks like they own all the way to the lake, but they don't. There's nobody owns to the lake on any property in Chautauqua. So anybody could just it's public property. Walk along the lakefront all the way from end to end, but it's not commonly. Once you get over there, it sort of looks like it's sort of a private property. But so that's a little unusual. Normally in other parts of the lake, right, you actually own right up to the lake.
But you got letters patent.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah. In two different pieces of legislation from the state, we actually have deeds, letters patent deeds to that. And okay, the dates of those, I think, they're very old. They're very old. I mean, they're at least 100 years old now. They'd be. I mean, I think so. It goes back, but it actually again it adds a little strength to the authority to deal with it, because lakefront issues pop up. Docks, right? Big deal, and and Chautauqua, could pull docks even though people, they own the dock and they put it out every year, and they've been doing it since their grandpa did it, 100 years. Well, that's okay, but if Chautauqua needed it for whatever reason to create a community dock or whatever, then they can just do that. They could just take it away.
Well, along those lines, wasn't there a point where you sort of had to remind people of that, because they would not have remembered it or even thought of it when they bought it, certainly. But do they have to get licenses? Do they get permit fees, dock permits?
Right, exactly. So we license them, and
Even
you
though they
pay.
had them there for 50 years, you got to license it.
You got a license, so they have to pay a fee, or they do
Yep.
pay a fee of, I think what we pay is like $400 or something. It's not a huge fee, but you pay a fee to be able to put your dock out and to,
Sort of a reminder who owns it.
Right, right.
As I recall, that was fairly contentious when that rolled out.
That was back, again, this was been in the 80s. That was a contentious issue. The board created a waterfront committee of members of the board and trying to figure out what regulations should be applied to the lakefront stuff. And that was contentious. There was some big meetings where a lot of people would show up and they'd say, wait a minute, I've had this dock for 50 years or whatever in the family. You're telling me that I don't really own or have the absolute right to use that, and that's true. You don't, and we're going to license it so that we're not intending to change much. Although actually our dock got yanked because they're expanding. They're expanding the the Boys and Girls Club dock. Where they're expanding the sailing program down there. How big it is now with that big dock.
Yeah.
You're out. And so we were able to sort of move down and combine with another group that had a dock, so we could. But it's kind of tight down there. But anyway, So that was a big issue back in the mid '80s.
Did the Chautauqua property owners group?
I'm trying to. There was no litigation on. There's never been litigation on waterfront that I can remember that ever really percolated into anything, where somebody challenged saying, "Hey, wait a minute. This is the Smith dock from 1902 or whatever, and it's going to stay that way, and you can't, and we're not going to." It's never. I think part of the reason Chautauqua didn't pull really any other than very rarely did they pull anybody's dock rights away, and you could still do it, but that the reality is that's just up to Chautauqua. To the extent if they needed the area for whatever reason, but I don't think that one anybody's ever really challenged. I think it would be a tough one to challenge. They actually, Chautauqua owns the ground itself, and so and the land that you're putting the dock on, even out into the water.
I'm sure it would just be an attempt at an adverse possession type of thing, but that would be hard to prove that you were taxed for that. The other big question always came up, and I think I talked to your dad about it, was the whole restriction on alcoholic beverages.
Oh yeah.
It's really kind of a funny story, but that was clearly in the old deeds clearly there.
Right. No, it was, it used to be. You couldn't. I think it was the language was you couldn't use or sell. Right. And people, couldn't use. I could lose my house because I'm having a drink on my private porch. Come on. So and I'm trying to remember the dates here, but there was an alcohol policy put into the rules and regulations that modified, and then there was a deed change, where the trustees actually changed the deed and also changed the rules. I think the covenant still says you can't sell it. So there is still an alcohol restriction, but it's not, use has been pulled out. Now they have as you know now, they're allowing the sale in the grounds on private, within sort of these zones that are okay, that it was commercial area of Chautauqua, whatever. If you have so that's been now permitted. And they've modified. They've looked at that. The trustees look at that periodically and have modified their their stance on it. That was a little controversial when they were going to allow, like at the hotel, right? And that was a big deal. There was a lot of, traditional Chautauqua folk, as you may have heard from too, they said, wait a minute, that's changing the whole character of Chautauqua. The thing that makes it great is we don't have to deal with any of that. But the trustees decided to sort of loosen the reins on that and allow it in certain situations. And I think it's worked out fine. People were, saying this is going to be horrible, and they're going to have bars, and it's going to turn into a bad situation. I don't think it's panned out that way.
Glad. This is a great conversation, Sam. Thank you for sharing Chautauqua.
Yep.
But the other thing that comes to mind, I know this is kind of early '80s type of thing, when Chautauqua properties were being put up being used as collateral for mortgages, and they'd be the VA and the FHA, and they didn't get the restrictions at all.
Right.
And I know your poor dad was inundated with trying to explain no big deal to this federal agency.
Fannie Mae, Well, right, yeah. So that was. So we actually had to deal with the Washington. I mean, eventually we had to sort of explain the situation and in a way that it wouldn't keep coming up. It wasn't because if they couldn't get sold on the secondary market, they couldn't get packaged and sold, then that's trouble, because some of the local banks would hold in their own portfolio, but by and large, most of your lending was done with these packages, and so there was so we had to put together a sort of a legal brief explaining, and send it down, and eventually we got a letter back saying, okay, we're gonna be okay with this. We did, I think, because there was and I'm trying to remember if it was in exactly this context, but I think part of it was, as you remember, the old deeds had a right of reverter.
That's right. I'm just going to bring that up. Reversion rights were just
right. So you'd actually lose title. Okay. So the trustee said, "Okay, we don't need that. We'll give that up as in this context. And all we have is, not all, but I mean, we can force the regulation, but we can't. If you violate blah blah blah, you don't lose your property just because of that. So, and I think that was the right way to go on it. Now there could be damages, there could be other issues, other enforcement techniques, which were ample. But you're right, that was a deal breaker for them. So you can't have a right of reverter, and on these mortgage things, you can't. And so we relented on that, and then they agreed that you can keep your restrictions, basically. Because that's important. People can't get a mortgage it's not everybody can just plunk down the cash, right?
Okay.
So.
Chautauqua's been a great interest, and your dad was in the eye of that, and then subsequently you. Yeah. What were some of the other hot ticket items at Chautauqua that kind of came up?
Well, every once in a while you'd get challenges to the rules and regulations and the covenants and the building restrictions, and so some of the bigger litigated cases because that's a sensitive thing for people when they're dealing with property rights. Right. So that was so we got in a couple pretty big, fairly sizable pieces of litigation on that kind of thing over the years. And I'm trying to remember. There was also another tax case that while I was there, we had to navigate through. It didn't get to litigation, but we had to work through that. But those are the big things, and so the issue was the authority of the trustees to enforce these regulations, really. And the appellate division on both occasions has really importantly issued pretty good case law supporting the Board of Trustees and their authority in this area, which is really critical, for sort of to maintain Chautauqua the way Chautauqua is. So that was that was an interesting.
And you were also brought into the eye of the storm on the lake issue. So,
on the
permitting and
right.
standing and all of that issues, more recently.
Right. With the new amphitheater and the issue around that, you mean, or the?
Well, I forgot about that, but yeah, that was.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that because that was a major capital improvement at Chautauqua.
Right.
And there was loud. I don't want to say it. There was a very opposition there.
Right.
What was the issue about that?
Well, I mean, again, it sort of boiled down again to the authority of the board, and then the question of. We're in a historic district there, mm-hmm. right? And to the extent to which legal issues around whether you could basically replace the amphitheater, right? Tear it down, and here you are in a historic district, blah, blah, blah. So there were some issues around that we worked through, and then, one of the things you maybe were touching on too is the lake issues around, the concern about the quality of the water, right. Because they draw from the lake. Chautauqua draws their drinking water from the lake, so obviously they're sensitive about the quality of the water they're getting and that kind of thing. So that was another one. But the AMP was a big issue in the grounds. I mean, it was very, very strong. I mean, there was opposition from a lot of people. A lot of people supported it, and the board went through an exhaustive process about trying to decide mm-hmm. whether it was possible to rehab the old AMP, or whether for the future Chautauqua it was time to create a new amphitheater. And they spent a lot of time on that and heard from a lot of people. Again, I think it turned out the right way. I think Chautauqua, that old AMP was in trouble as far as something needed to be done, and so anyway, it turned out. You're right. Now it's sort of in the background. You don't think about it, but at the time, you remember how hot an issue that was. Yeah.
And I felt so bad for our friends, like the president, Tom Becker. He was just in the eye of the storm.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. He was. Yeah, right. He had to absorb a lot of stuff on that front, but he stood firm on it, and anyway, we prevailed on it. I think it was the right thing for Chautauqua. But for a while there, it was a real question. You remember how emotional it was for a lot of people in that time frame. But as you say now, it's sort of course, that was a good thing.
Fortunately, it's passed.
Right.
But there were some, a lot of guys aged because of that, and without naming names, poor Tom Becker, he just took because he was president, and he just was in Buffalo News. My God, they just were relentless.
Yep.
Just relentless.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So all that, and likewise the lake, because it is such a emotional issue. Yeah. So when Chautauqua weighed in on that, because I was involved, not from a litigation perspective, but interviewing a lot of people, part of the stakeholders of the lake, and John Shedd did a very good job explaining it. But it was not everybody understood why this big Chautauqua institution all of a sudden weighed into what was otherwise municipalities.
Right.
Was that a hard conversation internally?
Yeah, and they actually ended up bringing in other counsel that specializes in the environmental world, and so I wasn't directly, other than just participating with board discussions around that, and so as far as the nuts and bolts of the legal issues that came up on that thing, I don't really know that much about that part, but it was the feeling was I think there was a little bit of lack of good communication on all sides. Beyond, I don't know if anybody was perfect on this one, but it really felt Chautauqua felt a little bit ignored, and what they felt was a very important issue around spraying and the science around what that could mean for them, so they felt a little bit like they needed to do something about it. But yeah, I don't know all the ins and outs of the legal issues on that part of it.
Yeah. Back to your biography. You Jamestown High School.
Yep.
Class
of 74.
74, and then went
to Denison in 78, and Washington Lee in 81. I graduated.
So, why Washington Lee?
Well, my brother was going there, and I went to visit him once. Tommy, my older brother, he went there. So, to be honest, I didn't, really know. But going there, it's a beautiful spot in the Shenandoah Valley. So it's a pretty area, and it's a small school. I think 107 or something, per class. So it's a fairly small law school. And I don't know. It just was very appealing, and it had good reputation. So. It seemed like a win-win all around, and really enjoyed my time there. It was great. It was a lot of fun, and I met, had some really good professors. I felt like, and so anyway, so that was good, and then from there came back. And
was there any question you were?
Well, it was interesting. I interviewed Greg with we weren't sure because whether they needed another lawyer back here or not. I mean, and so I wasn't sure I was coming back. I actually interviewed with a trust department in a big bank in New York City. I flew out for an interview to Westport, Connecticut. There was a small firm that did a lot of tax stuff, and I interviewed with them, and they offered me a job out there. And then there was interviewed with a firm in West Virginia, Charleston, and also in Pittsburgh. So I really was not sure where I was going to end up. And when I got that offer in Connecticut, I was that close to just doing that and not coming back. So I wasn't a question. It wasn't for sure I was going to come back here. But it turned out, that they could use me here. And so gave it a lot of thought and decided to come back to Jamestown, but it was sort of 50-50.
Mm-hmm. So then when you do come back, kind of integrated into the firm, did they want you to sort of ever get involved in kind of non-firm related stuff, whether it's the public defender's office or DA's office or anything like that? Was that a...
Yeah, actually I interviewed with the county attorney at the time. What was his name?
Laughlin?
Yeah.
Okay. Laughlin.
Yeah. Went up to his house in Westfield,
mm-hmm.
that great old house, and we sat in the living room. And, I'm trying to remember what happened there. It turned out that there was starting to be enough for me to do with the firm, and I never ended up, going in with the county attorney or doing anything like that. As it turned out, there was enough. Things started to develop enough, so there was enough to do just within the firm. But I did go through a couple of potential options like that. I did the Jamestown Urban Renewal Agency for a while, where represented them. So that was with the city, working with the city. And that was sort of fun, working with the mayor and the city over there. And then, so I enjoyed doing that stuff. And then I got involved with the YMCA just on the board, and we had a interesting time when they acquired Lakewood from Bush, Paul Bush, back in, I don't remember when that was now, Greg, but worked with their wife a little bit on that, and so that was interesting. That was really kind of neat, very interesting. That was fun, and then got involved with JCC, Jamestown Community College for quite a long time. That was a lot interesting because at the time they were building the new. Going to build a new Olean campus. And the question of where that was going to be located, we looked at sites outside of Olean and different places, and that was controversial with the county level as far as having them step up to the plate and pay the portion they would need to pay to make this thing work.
In Cattaraugus.
In Cattaraugus, exactly. And then the question of how the governance framework would work out as far as the trustee representation and how that was going to play out, and negotiations around that. There was some new legislation created for JCC on that thing at the time. So there was quite a lot going on when I was involved with that, which I really enjoyed working with. I'm chairman for a while, and so anyway, that was kind of an important part of what I was doing, for a while.
Well, yeah, exactly. And at the time, has Steve Abdallah been sort of your general counsel? Counsel, I shouldn't say general counsel, but did you get involved in the legal aspect of it?
I did. Well, it's funny. When I first came back, Charlie was representing, doing some work for JCC, and he had me do for the student association. We represented for some little stuff, and so I got involved a little bit doing that. But we never represented really for too long. JCC. They always had a lot of. It was funny. For a while, the assistant city attorney was the JCC attorney. Don Lynn, remember? So for a while, that's how they structured it. And then they moved away from that and just had they'd get their own counsel. And Steve Abdallah, just been doing it for a number of years now. Yeah. And, and he got affiliated with our firm, although he didn't do a lot of private practice, but he had a little bit. Yeah. So he joined us
Being one of the few attorneys living in Jamestown, were you ever approached to be a judge?
No.
I mean, that's one of the
I know, right? The resident requirement, right. And as you say, a lot of lawyers practice in Jamestown. A lot of them don't actually live in the city. But our judges really lasted a long time, didn't they? I mean, it was, Alessi was there for how many years? A long time. And but no, I never.
Would that have been of interest?
I don't know. That's an interesting thought. It might have been at some point. But I never did much in the way of criminal stuff, so I'd have to get involved in that. But you'd find yourself over there for clients, doing some stuff. I'm sure you did too, over the years. Not a lot, but but.
Did you get caught up in the family? Not caught up, right term. Appointed as family court guardians or county court guardians? Did you feel that world? Was that something you were?
The only stuff I did was out of surrogates court, where they would you'd get appointed, on that front. But I didn't. I'm trying. I had some court. I had a couple court appointed things, but very little. Yeah. Where you get drawn into a couple things here and there. I'm sure you did too, probably, but it's not. But yeah.
Did you have, when you were going through the practice, and obviously you had great mentors, and your uncle and your dad?
Yeah. Very lucky that way.
Very lucky. Were there anybody else that you recall that you kind of areas in which you felt uncomfortable, you kind of went out of and talked to? Did you use any of the other bar members?
Yeah. No, that's a good question, because I always felt, that it benefited me to be with other lawyers. I could bounce ideas off of or thoughts, and do I have this right? I think that's really helpful for particularly a young lawyer. And I was so fortunate, as you say, to have Charlie and my dad to do that with. And Tom Flowers, excellent lawyer. Knew a lot, and so I'd lean on him for on stuff too, quite a bit. And then, but it's not other lawyers so much. More internally, where you'd run up into a difficult problem. You're not sure. It's helpful to talk to an experienced lawyer and say, "Wait, what do you think of this? Am I looking at it the right way? There's another angle here," and so that's very helpful. As a lawyer, I think it's just so valuable. And I think of a lot of lawyers are on their own and don't have that. to me, it's just so important.
Hey, I'm going to throw in front of you a
Yeah.
1987 composite.
Yeah,
and there's a very young Sam Price.
Right.
And if there's any sort of vignettes or something you'd say, let me tell you about this issue or this crazy real estate deal or this individual quirk. And if you see anything there that jumps out, this is normally what I try to do with our guys. And
no, thanks, Greg. Yeah, no, it's let me see if there's anything that really pops out at me. We had quite a group, didn't we? You think about it, there's some personalities here, Oh, yeah. Well, I always enjoyed, like, Willard Cass, surrogate judge.
Right.
I've always enjoyed, when you go in front of him, I mean, like, he'd sit you down and you'd chat for a while. He wasn't like, okay, what's the thing, blah, 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 and you're out.
Right.
So it was sort of fun. I really felt he was he'd like to talk a little bit and chat, and I really enjoyed that that aspect of that part of it. And and Doug Spoto, what a classic. When I was a young lawyer, doing more and more real estate stuff, and you'd call up and you'd say, well, Doug, this or that, and the other thing, and he'd start, he could get a little loud, and he said, no, we're not, but he was very, very good lawyer and knowledgeable, and ultimately, even though he had a lot of bluster, he was a softie, right? Wouldn't you agree with that?
Absolutely.
And so he, if you asked him, or with he was very nice. I actually liked him a lot, but he was scared that Jesus out of me, early, and so that he's another one. But just looking here.
You see, of course, you probably similarly dealt with Lucian that same way.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Was Walter there at the time you started?
Yeah. Yeah, he was still there, but he wasn't really practicing then. He would come in most days, three-piece suit, perfectly dressed, coiffed, still perfectly sharp and everything. And he was real nice to me, and we would, get together. He'd take me to Sportsman's Club a few times, and I'd pick him up at his house, and very, very proper and very, very nice guy. And he always, he had some great stories of the old days with my grandfather, so that was a lot of fun. And, a lot of these guys, I'd have a lot of, you'd have some dealings with, depending on what area of law they were dealing with, but so they were.
Did you ever get before Judge Adams?
Yes, I did. It was a contested probate case, and it actually went to trial in front of him, and that was quite an experience. And meet Town Adams. He was a Yale graduate, I think, back in the day, and he was a personality, right?
I made a Kappa key right in front of him.
Right. Did you ever get to interview him?
Only about his war years.
Okay. Yeah.
That was a miss for me, but Cindy worked for him originally.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Cindy was his clerk, and she clerked for both he and Cass.
Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. He was something else. He was good judge. Good judge. Yeah. But anyway.
So as this is being kind of for the benefit of the Bar Association, Sammy, and you, 38 years, practice of law, is there sort of an experience, if somebody came in and sat down and says, what was it like to be a lawyer in Jamestown, New York, or any guidance? Would you kind of be reflective on that? It was, I don't know, Ray. I mean, it was a great experience because a couple things. When you're a lawyer, you're sort of your own boss. So when you're raising kids, I think a pretty good town to raise kids in. At least it was in my day.
And so if I needed to get out and go to a game or do something, you had your own time. You could work. So being a lawyer like that, I thought it was great because he gave you some flexibility. And if you needed, you're busy, you needed to make up. You could come. And I was a morning person, so I could get up early and come in and get a lot done early, and then have time to do other stuff. So I thought that was kind of neat. That was in the small town practice feeling where you have flexibility and do things. And of course, we live in such a beautiful area. I mean, I think. I pinch myself sometimes. I think it's just spectacular. It's beautiful. I mean, you have, the mountains. You've got fresh water. You got the lakes. You've got. I mean, it's just. I think it's a beautiful place to live and to raise a family. And a small town practice is sort of like, wow. I mean, you're not. You heard the stories of your classmates and stuff. Where they're working, I don't know how many hours a day, cranking it out and all that. And for me, I don't think I would have taken well to that kind of a stress and all that. So I just think that, to me, just having, you'd work hard and do stuff. And the other thing is getting to know all the other lawyers, so you knew them. I mean, it wasn't like, it was a small town, everybody. And that's nice. You can call up and say, "What do you think of this? Here's how. Can we work it out this way?" And you're both trying to work together, try to get a good result all the way around. And I sort of like that feeling about this community here. At least that was the way it was. To what extent it's still that way, but it really was that way for me, I think so. I guess that would be a comment, I'd say,
So you knew you were coming down here today, and is there any questions you expected that I would ask you, Sam, that I haven't?
That's interesting. No, I think it's pretty much what I expected, a little bit about my early time and then, not, the volunteer stuff, and then just some of the stuff about the practice. So that's what I sort of was, I guess, expecting. So you did that.
This will be a YouTube moment.
Okay, Greg. Nice to be with you.